Hello. So I posted Fred Schwartz's "What Is Communism" spoken word album. So here's a quick explanation of it for context, as I see things at least. I downloaded this album thing quite a while ago, and because I thought it should be shared, and I think a lot of the points and ideas have a lot of relevance to where we are today. I've digested a fair bit of material about communism over the years, and this is one of the best things I've come across. This guy's the same guy's book. You Can Still Trust the Communists, which seems to be out of print now, even the updated version that I read from the noughties. So it's really expensive now if you try and buy it. But it's a great book. There are quite a lot of openly avowed commies around these days. It seems to be something that's growing in terms of people openly promoting communist ideals. But I'm also aware you could say, in a way, this is old, it's kind of irrelevant, as in the system that's being created around us right now, with the help of the brainwashed, dumb masses, and especially young people, who are particularly worrying as a group of people for me these days. The new system isn't communism, and I'd agree with that. But it is worth saying that definitions are a bit murky. As an example, communism is supposed to be, ultimately, it's supposed to be a stateless society. In the end, the final goal, But it's, of course, always been anything but that in practice. And all the extremist communist governments over the years, they've all called themselves socialist. But I think most people understand that socialism is basically communism light, with state or collective ownership of most things rather than state ownership of absolutely everything in the case of communism. Anyway, what's being built around us now could be called corporatism, fascism. There's a big communitarianism aspect to it, which is kind of the 15-minute cities and smart cities, all about helping your community and being responsible to and accountable to your community in ways that your owners decide you need to be, and so on. There are lots of words and terms that could be used to describe what we're marching towards that focus on different aspects of it. But obviously the system is going to involve corporations, so it won't strictly be state ownership of everything. So therefore it's not communism as we all understand it. It'll be national governments and global bodies overseeing those national governments and pulling their strings, and perhaps after a while redrawn zones kind of that overlap or cross over several what used to be nations. There's been a lot of talk about a kind of redrawing of national boundaries and things under, I think, UN discussion papers and things over many years. So what we know to be countries at the moment could well change. They could become part of smaller or sort of bigger unions and things. But anyway, whatever they are, these governmental entities at a more kind of local level will be working under a kind of global government organisation, but they'll be working hand in hand with corporations to control every aspect of our lives. So public-private partnerships. So again, not communism, just to be clear that I'm clear on that. It'll be the merging of state and corporate powers, which I believe is the definition of fascism according to Mussolini. I've heard people say as well, which I think is true, that there are all these isms, but the only real ism to worry about is totalitarianism. And I agree, and we're definitely heading towards that. But there will be some very, very big things in common with communism, and perhaps from our point of view, more things in common with it than not in common. I think for our purposes, but for us plebs, it will basically be like high tech, because we're at that stage in history, higher tech than anything we know has ever been achieved before, form of communism. And key in what we'll see will be the abolition of private property. You'll own nothing, slave, and be happy. giving away all your rights, not just your property rights, to the greater good in the name of some state-decreed cause and struggle. I think if the dumb masses really began to understand that this really is being pursued and it's in progress, the end of private property and the end of voluntary, unencumbered peer-to-peer exchange, being able to directly trade with another individual because you both choose to trade without involving the state. If they understand that, they understood it, surely they'd be bothered by that. But of course, they choose not to look and to stay blind instead, and to just take the piss out of those of us who try and warn them of what their owners are openly planning. But if they did bother to look and see and face it, then surely there would be massive unrest. And then they'd feel the need to put a lot of people in jail, which Rishi is talking about now. So me, no doubt, I'd be straight in there for incitement through what could be broadly called music. Anyway, on that note, as has been predicted by many people, we've just seen the reprehensible subhuman scum in the British Parliament have overwhelmingly approved 280 filthy animals to 19 this energy bill, this new energy bill, which allows for an up to £15,000 fine and or up to 1 year in prison for failing to meet environmental regulations on your property that you think you own, or all these Normaltons believe that they own. And of course, it's unthinkable that either the fine amounts or the prison sentences could ever be increased from there. No government would ever expand their control and become more tyrannical over time. That's just impossible. Or so the zombies keep telling themselves, if they even know or care about any of this at all, which they don't. And of course, also, to be clear, the regulations that you'll need to comply with will all be totally reasonable and necessary because of climate change, which is settled science, and catastrophic anthropogenic global warming just cannot possibly be not true. It's or less less of a threat than they say it is. So it's all kind of absolute black and white and all in. If you go for it, you accept it's just as bad and going to be absolutely an existential threat. And so whatever they say is necessary to combat it is necessary. And you're all in and we're all in to see it happen and accept it. And the regulations, of course, they'll be affordable for people to comply with in place of this £15,000 fine, I don't think. But that's I guess what people are expected to think, that these penalties will only affect absolute arseholes who are completely irresponsible and just being difficult for the sake of it. So with that sort of thought process in mind, most people are just going to comply, and many of them will defend their abusers. Most people probably will, or a good number anyway, and they'll basically pay the protection money until they're wiped out, and then ultimately they hand over their house. A person I respect for her wisdom on this so much is a lady called Cindy Niles in Australia, and it's worth mentioning along with her somebody else called Julianne Romanello in America, in Tulsa, and a lady in the UK, I think in Scotland, called Temora Yuille, and they both speak a lot specifically about smart cities. But I've been thinking about posting Cindy's talks up on YouTube, maybe with relevant footage, video footage, or maybe just repost her talks as they are, because she just talks off the cuff about things in a very, very clear way, and with a lot of wisdom, and she knows her stuff. So I'm going to link to her and to the other two ladies I mentioned in the description. So the reason I mention her is about a year ago, she gave a really great breakdown of how they, the powers that be, the Great Reset, Fourth Industrial Revolution crew, Klaus and co., how they were going to achieve this "you will own nothing" thing. How could they achieve it? How are they going to take your house from you? Because people don't believe it. Most people, they just don't believe it, don't think it's possible. Well, the answer, of course, was and is environmental regulations on your home, along with zoning and a few other tax cons and general financial coercion by the state and economic warfare by the state against you. That's how they take, within a generation or two, all property from you, including your home. So these tactics were very, very clearly laid out and explained by Cindy in a kind of story, and I thought it was brilliant, very telling. And I wish I'd have shared it somehow before now, but I think I will share that directly. But anyway, we see it unfolding now, really just as she predicted, or at least beginning to unfold just like she predicted. They're going to make you do this to your house, and then new regulations, they make you do that to your house, and you've got to meet these requirements, those requirements. And whenever you stop, whatever point it is, when you can't continue, when it's become just, you literally can't comply anymore because you've spent everything, you've remortgaged, you're spending literally as much as you can. You can't put your hands on any more money to comply with their demands. Then you'll be punished, and then ultimately they'll take it from you. I've been aware for a long time that people are ridiculously lax and blindly trusting about their property rights. Your rights to own and hold property are completely dependent on how much the government will support them, or at least not shit all over them by stealing what you've earned and paid for and what you believe to be yours. An Englishman's home is his castle. That's what he has always been trained to believe for so long. It's really part of the culture here. But get real, that's not how it is. Governments are force, and they can and do turn very bad. And they can certainly steal anything. They can murder people in unthinkable numbers. So they can certainly steal and do all the time, and we're just going into a period where it's going to happen on a massive scale. And you can't hide a house. There aren't many things you can hide. But the government can and will come along just like the mafia, which is what they are. And they'll say, do this. No, do this. No, do this. And then ultimately, it'll be a case of, oh dear, can't pay? Looks like we're going to have to take this off your hands. The boss is going to be so sad to hear this happen to you. So this is one of the things that the dumb masses could, if they could just pay attention to long enough to grasp and face it, they'd be horrified about it. Your property rights are being trampled on and shat all over in the name of saving the planet, in the name of the green agenda, which is one big scam to steal your property rights and all your other rights. But most people will go along with it. Very large numbers will actively support it because they're begging for it. They're begging for serfdom. And this is the thing. Most people have signed on to this idea that experts tell us that there's a crisis, and we have to listen to the experts because the experts are never wrong, and they're never bought, and they're never compromised, and they're never susceptible to the hive mind or social conformity or just to the structure that they're employed under, and what their bosses tell them. Oh, no. They're all infinitely brave and full of integrity and independent thought. So because of the truths, these absolute truths from these infallible experts, we will all have to make these sacrifices, sadly. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. And once people accept that, this need to make sacrifices, then the jackboot is in the door. The door's open and the thug is part way in your house. And you don't get to say when and where it stops. And these tyranny-loving climate champions that we're surrounded by haven't even thought that it could possibly go too far, that they might have to give up more of their rights than they think is okay. And haven't really thought of what that might mean to them and for them. that they might have to pay a really serious price, like losing their home and all their wealth, let alone that there's absolutely no real need, that it might actually just be theft and abuse, and that it was all just a cover for that from the very start. So all this ties into collectivism. It is collectivism, this idea of shared responsibility for dealing with some massive cause or threat, this idea of shared ownership of everything as determined and directed by the state. But it is not exactly communism from my thinking, because the future plan for us will involve support, helpful support from those lovely corporations who just happen to be the best companies around to support the state in the things it needs to do for you. Anyway, does anyone remember that, say, back in the 1980s, or certainly earlier than that, in post-war years, the baby boomer period, we still all had this idea that the state was there to serve people. You had key rights and as an individual in the Western world, and they could only be infringed on by the state in a few extreme and necessary cases. Going forward, you have no rights by default, and you have to apply and beg for permission to do anything and everything, and compliance and submission are going to be the only real currency. With the path we're on, unfortunately, it won't be very long before most people won't even remember what used to be the common view of what the government was and what it was there for. People will know very clearly, and I think they kind of do on a level now, that they're subservient to the state and to causes as determined and communicated by the state and its corporate partners. To me, collectivism is the big real threat and problem. The more people accept these arguments of shared responsibility towards the greater good and these causes, which has to be interpreted and decided on by the state, the more they're proactively basically stamping on and destroying their own individual human rights and everybody else's. There are at least two big obstacles in the way, really, aren't there, when you think about sort of solving that. The first one is that these people have obviously bought the story of the greater good cause that's being used as the excuse for tyranny, including the problems that are either made up or misrepresented in terms of the wrong thing being blamed. So they've bought the story, they've bought the cover story, that's the big main thing. And then the second thing is they haven't yet actually paid the price of the tyranny that they're signing up to and supporting. They haven't given all their rights away yet, and they haven't given away all their property yet, and they haven't really started to think about how far things could go, and that things could go that far. Anyway, there's a lot of wisdom in this playlist about the manipulative techniques of communists, and nowadays you could apply that to, social justice campaign groups, and how people are suckered into supporting collectivist ideologies. I'll leave it there pretty much, except to mention that everybody's favourite truth-telling musician, Oliver Anthony, was apparently due to be interviewed at the Burning Man Festival by Midwestern Marks, a communist journal and podcast. They said that they were going to be interviewing him anyway, and they've been very supportive of him, which is a bit interesting. I think you might agree.